Well, hey guys, happy Lord's Day. I was reading through the Gospel of Mark this morning and came across a little verse that I know to many people may just read over this and not even notice. But if you're trying to read carefully, this is an odd little literary detail for the gospel author Mark to include in this narrative. So um, you're reading through the passion narrative, that night leading up to Christ's crucifixion. You come across this little verse. A young man followed him, but with nothing but a linen cloth about his body, and they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. It's odd. Uh, So you're just reading the narrative. Right before this, Jesus is in the garden praying. You've got the arrest and betrayal of Jesus. Right after this, you have Jesus before the council. It's all that all those things happening that night. But then there's this guy following him. His cloth gets ripped off, and he runs away naked. You're like, why is this here? This is odd, and it's not in the other two gospels, um, the other gospel accounts. Uh, so I want to take a second and get at this. So who is the man? I think many people historically have said, since I think the 13th century, people have been saying that it's Mark himself, which could be possible, but it doesn't say that. And some have thought it was Joseph of Arimathea. Some thought it was I think Lazarus. There's different views out there, but we don't know. And I think the reason for us not knowing and leaving the identity unknown is so that we can feel, in some sense, this represents us. Now, obviously, it doesn't. This was a historical person, but I think the vagueness of the identity does allow us to put ourselves into the narrative and feel this represents us. I'm there, running away, with all the others that were running away. Because remember the context here, you have Peter's denial predicted and then fulfilled, all in Mark 14. Judas's betrayal predicted and fulfilled in Mark 14. You have the Jewish council pushing Jesus away and doesn't care about him. You have his disciples, the 11, his closest friends, falling asleep in the garden that night, couldn't stay up an hour and pray with him, and they're kind of pushing him away spiritually. And then when they come to arrest Jesus, they all flee and run. So all of Mark 14 is just people running away from Jesus in shame, in fear, just fleeing him. And then you have this little literary note about a young man following him, and that man running away and his cloth being taken, and he runs away naked and ashamed. And you think, whoa, hold on. Back to Genesis, that in the garden they were both naked and unashamed. But then now here in this other garden, fast forward, and you have a young man who's naked and ashamed. That's interesting. And think back to the garden for a second, because this is not insignificant. This really does get at the meaning of this, I believe. What did Adam and Eve do in the garden once sin occurred? So they were naked and unashamed before the fall, but then after the fall, what happened? They hid themselves. Adam hid himself from God and tried to cover himself with a fig leaf. So he's trying to cover himself physically, but also spiritually. There was a shame. There was a vulnerability. He felt too much was being revealed of his guilt, of his unrighteousness before God, so that he had to clothe himself. But what did God do? There's a little beautiful gospel picture there in Genesis chapter 3. God kills an animal in that garden and clothed Adam and Eve's nakedness. Right? So we already see this foreshadowing of this gospel picture there in Genesis about God dealing with shame and covering their nakedness. But then now fast forward to this other garden, And here we have a man right before Jesus dies on the cross, running away in shame and nakedness. And it's as if Mark is pointing out that the nakedness and the shame before the cross would be taken upon Christ on the cross. He went through his betrayal. He went through the suffering and all that led up to the cross with that with the garment on, and it was bloodied and ripped, and then they took it off, and he died naked. He took our place. But then what do we see in Mark 15? And in the resurrection, he arises and he leaves that old garment in the tomb, and then he comes out and he appears with a new garment, a shining, bright, pure linen garment on. And this is obviously significant. So, Jesus gave the wedding parable feast. You can't get into the heavenly kingdom. You can't get into the marriage supper of the Lamb if you don't have a garment on. Remember that parable? He says many are going to try to get in, but they won't have a garment. They'll be naked in that sense. They won't be able to come in. And then we see that beautiful picture in Revelation 19:7 that says, "Let us rejoice and exult in the Lord, for the marriage supper of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready, and it was granted to her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure." And so that young man in the garden that day, running away, unclothed, represents us, that we aren't good enough. We need a pure, righteous garment. And only Christ could provide that. Only Christ could provide the righteous, pure garment that could remove our shame and help us walk before God unashamed, clothed purely before Him. I think that is the little clue. And then how awesome is this verse in Isaiah 61:10 that says, "I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul shall exult in my God, for He has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness." And that name is so appropriate that we give to the Lord. He is called Jehovah Sidnu. Jehovah Sidnu. The Lord is our righteousness. So that little passage in Mark 14 that seems very insignificant, when you begin to think about it, does seem to hold far more significance than we often think. May that encourage you. Go out in full confidence, no shame, because of the righteousness of Christ that is ours by faith. Blessings, saints. Talk to you later. Bye.